Ka nui te mihi kia koutou e hui hui mai nei. Ko Erica Van Rienan toko ingoa. The reality is that the very important mahi that everyone is undertaking in this room will only matter if the farmer does something about it. It therefore gives me great pleasure to be chairing this session on mitigation in action, on the ground innovation. And I'd like to invite Ken, Cynthia, Emma and George up to the stage, please. And while they come up, I did see Ken race for the door, so it's good that had to muster my little farmers. So first up, we will have Cynthia Lawrence from Beef and Lamb New Zealand talking about the Cool Sheep program, aptly named. Cynthia will be followed by George Moss, a dairy farmer from Tokoroa Pastures, and he's sharing what's possible over time. Emma Crutchley, a sheep and beef farmer from Puketoi in the Maniatoto, will talk on managing profitability while enhancing the surrounding environment. And finally, Ken Goldsmith of Ngāti Porou, a chartered accountant and trustee on a number of ahu whenua trusts in the Bay of Plenty, will finish the session talking about emission reductions from a Māori perspective. So, Cynthia, I'll invite you up.
Good morning and thank you, Erica. Just a disclosure, I am not a farmer, but I have the farmers in my ears, so the ones who can't be here today, and they've been very pivotal on what I'm going to be speaking about today. So I have the absolute pleasure of and privilege of talking on behalf of the team, the Cool Sheep team, about the program that we are running. So it's a jointly funded program with industry and government, and the goal of the program is to give every sheep farmer the option to use genetic selection as a tool to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their flock while also improving productivity. Now, there are three main components of this program. That's first identifying low methane rams in the sector. So this is in the stud sector, and identifying a methane ram that produces less methane than his peer. It's then the tracking of that ram into the commercial farmer flock and those genetics from that ram through the flock over time. It's then looking at how that movement of genetics for those lower methane emission genetics accounts for the methane reduction on farm. So that's the three main components. What does that look like graphically? So as a make-believe farmer, I've identified my three rams, these guys in white, who have the traits that I'm really interested in for my farm system. So ones that are really important for my farm profitability. Those rams, when I look at them with a methane lens, also produce less methane. So I bring those into my flock. My flock has a yay big methane cloud at the moment, but as the genetics from those rams move into my flock by way of lower methane replacements, my methane cloud starts shrinking, as you can see by having more of those white guys. And over time, my methane cloud gets smaller, so my emissions go down, but my productivity is going up. So Suzanne talked a little bit about this before, but I just want to show you a video of how we measure the methane in the animals. So AgResearch has this trailer that has 12 portable accumulation chambers on them. We take that up to the stud breeder farms. The rams go in there and we measure them for an hour for their carbon dioxide, their oxygen and their methane. And then that gives us an estimation of their breeding value that we can apply for that sire. So the goal of the program is that it's profitable. So for a farm system, it makes sense to use rams that meet those traits that you're wanting for your farm system to go beyond just you as the farm owner. It goes to your own progeny, so your farm system is viable. It's also got to be sustainable. And that's not just from an environmental perspective, that's in terms of the program. so that it's sustainable beyond the funding window that we have. So there is still selection going on at the farm level for these low methane rams, so they're desirable. It's also got to have that credible and auditable component so that when you're making claims that you have those genetics in your flock, that we can show that. So if we have a look a little bit at the data, so there are two graphs here. The top one is looking at productivity and the lower one is looking at disease traits. So along the bottom is years of both graphs, and going up the y-axis is the index in terms of increasing economic worth. The national average flock is shown in the blue line, and relative to that national average are two dotted lines of two examples of our cool sheep flocks. And you can see for both productivity in the top graph and disease traits, disease tolerance traits in the bottom graph, you can see that those are both climbing up. If we start looking at when they started measuring for methane and selecting for methane, we can see that regardless of where each of those flocks started, they're tracking down when they look with a methane lens. So here we're looking at genomic breeding values of the numbers that have come out of those packed trailers. If we overlay what that did to productivity and disease trait, we can see that there's actually simultaneous improvement in both the productivity and the disease tolerance of these traits in these flocks, but also that methane emissions are going down. So that's a really key point. This is a good thing to do. And it really is an opportunity. It's a cool sheep opportunity. And it gets at what's been talked about over the last 2 days, at factors that are important to government and also the private sector. So those national targets that have been mentioned, those global commitments that we're signed up to, and the government's desire for doubling exports. It also gets at those private sector factors, so that market access component that we're increasingly hearing about in terms of an environmental bent. Consumer expectations of that their products need to be, and increasingly need to be, environmentally and sustainably of value. And also those non-regulatory standards, so things like in the building industry, of products going into the building industry having a low carbon footprint. However, all of those factors rely on collective action, and that's not something that I, as a pretend farmer, can do on farm. That's not a decision that I can influence. What we need to be able to do is enable market demand for products that reward farmers for reducing their emissions, because that then enables that individual business decision to happen on farm for the farmers to choose what they would like to do. And ideally, it's creating this feedback link so that market demand is driving the change, and that's getting at those collective factors that we're hoping to move on. However, what we are seeing, that there's currently a disconnect between the two. There is no link to drive change. What we need to do is we need to enable the market to enable farmers to make that choice on farm. If we don't invest in supporting that market demand, we risk losing this market opportunity. And that market opportunity here is a cool sheep opportunity. It's providing environmental credibility to an attribute that underpins value-added products while also rewarding farmers. And this is just an example of where that low methane ram can end up in terms of its progeny. So in thinking about where farmers in the stud industry see this particular opportunity, I want to leave you with 2 quotes. Biogenic methane gas is of no use to the animal. Reducing methane emissions without impacting on any productive traits just makes sense. Timing is key. The best time to improve any trait was 10 years ago. The next best time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Now for George Moss.
Presenting is not my core competency, but up there is the villain and her villainous owner. So look, kia ora tātou, ko George Moss ahau, whāma Tokoroa. And what I'm going to talk about today is a bit of the strategy that we've been running since about 2019, based on some work that Dairy NZ did. They actually put in front of a number of us farmers a scatter graph with A, B, C and D. A was high profit farmers, low methane per hectare. B was high profit farmers, high methane a hectare. C was low profit, low methane. And D was high methane and low profit. And we were sitting in the A space then, but it actually triggered something to actually start moving, start thinking about the space. So we've been on this journey since about 2018, 2019. We're not perfect, we can do things better, and there's better farmers than us that are out there, and hopefully I can run the technology. But one of the things for us is that GHGs for us are fundamentally an efficiency index. It's about using a resource to the best effect to gain the best outcome both in productivity and profitability. To that end, we have been using Overseer, Dairy Base, Farm Max, and now the Fonterra models since their inception. But part of the light bulb moment that came with that was both my wife and I, we looked at the herd and we found that there were outliers within that herd. And there is 2 cows. They are not the average cows, they are outliers. But when we look at their production and their days in milk, we could actually see if we could have a whole herd of cows doing that, we could actually drop just short of 25% of the herd, which would actually give us the same production, same or more production at a 23% to 25% less cost. So that's fundamentally drove what we did. What do we know? And been part of LIC for a long time, and I've taken this quote from their report. Efficient cows produce more milk solids per kilogram of feed eaten, have a fertility advantage, have low emissions footprint per kilogram of milk solids, and that was out of their 2023 annual report. Of the tools available for us as dairy farmers and for our farm in particular, this is the most logical path to go down, but we do have a suite of options in our strategy, and we're doing other things as well. So we have been chasing those high genetic merit cows. We have been trying to get the herd far more mature because the mature cow produces way more milk than an immature cow. Trying to manage the wastage of good cows, have less replacements because those replacements aren't actually producing everything. And the other part that we had watched with a lot of our fellow farmers, they actually had changed their farming systems to systems that had higher greenhouse gas outputs to manage low fertility rates in the herd. So this became one of the key planks for our strategy. Here is, I've picked just a group of cows that is in the herd. I've gone to 22, 23 3-year-old cows, and a couple of reasons for that. One, if you look at the days in milk are almost identical. So that kept everything, took out one of the variables. And it was also all of the same age cows. And you can see that the top third of those animals there were producing 89 kilograms more milk than the bottom third of that. And you can see the correlations between the indexes there. And what that would actually show that, and we worked out from that, and I've got some maths that sit in behind that, we could produce the same milk, which is reporting again with 18% less cows, just on those indexes there. Now, what we can actually say now is that the heifer calves born this year, and people in LIC will know this, will come in with a breeding worth of 501 and a production worth of just over 500. So within 3 years of that, you can see we've actually lifted the genetic thing another 200 points in BW. So that is fundamentally part of chasing the efficiency that we're after. So one of the challenges that was put to me by Naomi was to talk about the possibilities. What can actually be achieved out there with the current technologies? And so what I have pulled up, and courtesy of Fonterra here and courtesy of their efficiency dashboard, and they've literally chucked millions at this place and millions in supporting farmers. And they've supported us big time. We're a System 2 type farm, so a very low input farming system. We will buy a bit of feed in the spring and we will buy a bit in the autumn if we have to, but fundamentally we want to be grass farmers. In that database that Fonterra's got, For the 23-24 season, there was 1,527 System 2 farms like us, and they had a intensity of 11.66 kilograms of CO2e per kilogram of milk solids. We're sitting Tokoroa Pastoral at 10.51. So against the System 2 farms, we're just under 10% better in lower intensity. Under the System 5 farms, which are high intensive farms, we're about 12% better. On a per hectare basis, the other System 2 farms, on average, were better than us. They had a lower absolute emissions at 11 tonne a hectare, whereas we were 11.8 tonne, or just under 11.9 tonne. So that's an area that we've actually got to work on and continue to pull down. Of the System 5 farms, we were just short of 20% better. But what farmers say, and it came out yesterday, you know, what is the profit driver of all this? Where is the cost? Where is the benefit? Now, I've used dairy-based data there. If you look at the System 2 farms, they were at $2,700 a hectare, just over economic farm surplus a hectare. System 5 farms were only about 100 above. Admittedly, it was a low milk price year that year. Tokoroa Pastoral was sitting just under $4,000. So we had a profit advantage per hectare of 45% over the System 2 and 41%. And you can see the milk solids per hectare along the bottom. Now, if you look at how, and the big question is, what have we actually achieved over time? Where's the farm going over time? And I've looked at the correlations between the different models. So there's Farm Max, there's Overseer sitting there, and we now have, initially we had AIM within Fonterra, and if I got that wrong, somebody from Fonterra can actually correct me. And now they've gone to life cycle analysis, which is far more detailed and that. And you can see in 2021, we were 12.37 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilo of milk solids. And now, and for the last season, we're down to 10.51, which is a reduction of 15%. And which is in line with some work that was done in 2009 by Dairy NZ, Pierre Burks, who actually showed why cattle farmers could drop greenhouse gases by 15% and lift profit by 23%. That work was done in 2009 and gives you an indication as a sector just how fast we have moved or not moved. Absolute emissions, because at the end of the day, it is the absolute emissions that are actually going to work to help this planet. Over that time period, all the indications from the Fonterra Dairy Insights is that we've actually dropped absolute emissions by 18%. I personally think it's understated because within all the models now, every single cow is treated the same. It's a back calculation of feed. It cannot take into account the genetic merit. And yes, the better cows may eat a bit more, but they're not eating double, and that's the range that we see in some of these herds. And you've got the operating profit of Tokoroa Pastoral there per hectare versus the Waikato owner average operating profit. And the year that we were only 7.6% ahead was because we took a fixed milk price position and we got it wrong. In finishing, so what are the trends and challenges that we've actually run into on the farm? We've actually dropped cow numbers from 180 to 167 cows. The goal is to get to 160 cows producing 500 milk solids in 250 days with a 480 kilogram cow. Nitrogen has dropped over a longer period of time from 240 kilograms a hectare to 120. Within 10 years, the herd has gone from the top half in the country and will be in the top 2% this year. Milk solids are about 450 kilograms a cow and trending up for a System 2 farm. That's pretty good. Days in milk are actually trending down slightly, so we're doing more milk or the same amount of milk in fewer days. Total milk solids is flattish, but the challenges we're running into are that the seasons themselves, the climate itself, is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Pasture management is becoming increasingly difficult, but we're at a lower stocking rate. And the hardest challenge of all is getting staff and people to embrace the importance of actually doing this thing. It's a headspace. The problem that we're actually managing is a headspace problem. We have knowledge out there now. So my last key message is up there. That's good, isn't it? Don't be scared. This thing is absolutely doable. The trends are there. You only have to look at the bell-shaped data that comes out of Dairy NZ and now Fonterra, and you can actually see the opportunities. And I personally believe that 20% is easily done within a decade. Key to have a plan and key to play the long game of where you want your business to be. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We'll now hear from Emma Crutchley.
Kia ora. I have to say for a start, it's been a real privilege to be here. The conversations yesterday, incredibly engaging, and even the presentations and then the conversations over morning tea, lunch and afternoon tea. My name's Emma. The other thing I'm incredibly privileged to be is a sheep and beef farmer and arable, from the Mini-Atoto in Central Otago. I think the best way to describe where I live is that for those of you who have driven between Omakau and Turihua or to Ranfurly, when you come over the hill, at the top of the hill there, before you drop into the Ida Valley, if you look out to the right and straight at the horizon across and down a bit, that is the very back of Puketoi. It stretches right up to about 1,000 metres above sea level and then drops right down the other side and reaches the flat of the Mini-Atoto, then stretches across the flat to the Tairi River, which is 350 metres above sea level. We have a 350 mil rainfall. Our winter starts in May, as you can see by one of the photos there. We spend quite a lot of time in a sub-zero climate, and then in summer we also spend quite a lot of time in temperatures around about 30 degrees, which I'm pretty sure they are at home this week. The other thing that's happening this week is that photo in the bottom left of the screen is our prime lambs, and I took that photo on Sunday when I was writing this presentation, and that's what my husband is doing today. So I've missed the draft for the first time in 15 years, and they come straight off Lucerne, so they're born in September and drafted the last week of November, the first week of December, straight off Lucerne and onto a truck. We've got an Angus stud, and over the past probably 14 years or so, we've diversified from probably 8 hectares of arable production into about 100, and that's wheat, oats, peas, linseed, and a few clovers, ryegrass, and other bits and bobs. You can see, 460 hectares of irrigation, and that's the wheelhouse of our production system. It grows our brassicas reliably that we can bank on for winter feed. It's how we make our silage and how we grow our crops. So I guess in terms of our farm system, we've always run off the principle that the biggest efficiency gain we can make is to match our land use within the environmental limits and the climate that we have, and that climate's pretty extreme. A simple old principle of matching growth or what we can grow with animal demand. So it allows us resilience, and that's a big part of it. Water is a massive part of it, not more water. It's how you use water, and I think that's really important, because with water and irrigation, we can wind ourselves into a place where we're actually not resilient anymore. It's complex. Profit is an important metric, but it's short, medium, and long term, and we're considering the negative and positive impacts of our actions. So I guess when we talk about actions on farm, multiple actions can tackle an individual challenge, and multiple challenges can be tackled with an individual action. It's a silver buckshot, but it goes both ways. And it's also, as described really relevantly yesterday, those resonating, visible little actions are what can make movements in missions. So I guess what I mean by that is my grandfather and my father planted a lot of shelter. They didn't do that thinking that it would be an offset, right? But now when I plant shelter, I'm thinking, yes, there's a little bit of an offset. As the arable, it allows us the flexibility to bring our U numbers down, which in turn reduces our emissions because of that direct link. Animal husbandry, it's really important that we're getting the gain from that kilogram of food that we eat. Solar. So this year, and I was listening to Rod and doing myself a little fist pump yesterday, is we have just invested in an on-farm solar kit that will power half our irrigated country. And the guy, when we invested in it, said to me, he said, Emma, I've got a dairy farmer and he can tell me the amount of emissions he is saving per kg of milk solid. How do you do that for sheep and beef? And I laughed and I said, good luck, but I do know that it reduces my power costs by about half, and that's pretty important right now. So I guess the other one is a QE2, and I said to my dad, we've got funding, this option to do a QE2, and he said, what is the benefit of it? Because obviously we're not getting any benefit from biodiversity gains on farm. And I said, well, it actually creates a massive biosecurity corridor between us and our neighbour, and he just said, go for it. So the other one is direct drilling. As a child, I remember our paddocks blowing away because cultivation was the way you did it, right? So we've been using direct drilling technologies for 20 years. It also preserves soil carbon. So my next slide is basically, this shows that I'm fully disclosing our emissions profile. So in 2012, we were pretty, we leapt really. We did a massive irrigation investment. You can see the rise. You can see the direct link with stock numbers of the methane. Slight increase in carbon dioxide over that time. We decreased in 2019 because we realised we actually weren't that resilient. When you get supply chain disruptions with COVID, you kind of think, well, actually, I need to think about this a bit harder because it's not only what happens behind the farm gate that affects me, it's that supply chain and someone's ability to actually take my stock. So we increased our arable, then you see a reset because when you decrease your U numbers, you increase your productivity. Then equalisation into 2024, a drought year, so CO2 emissions are lower because we actually didn't make any winter silage. We made it all the year before, so we work on 3 years of winter silage ahead of us, and that's how we create resilience. But then on the other side, I asked Copilot over the weekend how I actually present my financials without presenting my financials, so that's all our farm data. And you can see cash surplus is the top line, and then against farm working expenses and land price per head. We made some massive gains through the early 2012 to 2019. Then we can see the impact of increasing farm working expenses and the slight equalisation in stock numbers, not really a drop in productivity because the land price was still going up. Then as that land price started to drop, you can see the impact on our farm business, even though we have a large area of, well, not a large area, but a fair proportion of arable that will help us. We're so sensitive to the land price, so that tanked out to about $114, and I think in about 22, we were sitting on about $160, $170 a lamb. And so it just, it tells an interesting story. And the other part of it that it tells is that it's not just, it's not just the productivity that's the issue. It doesn't matter. We're still really, really sensitive to that drop in land price. So I guess I've got some take-homes here, and that's my final slide. But I guess the sheep and beef industry has made some massive gains beyond the farm gate, behind the farm gate. There's not much left to squeeze out. We're still working on it. But this is where the emissions efficiency discussion is actually really challenging for me to grasp. Production per animal in terms of the sheep and beef industry, we've done so much in the past 20 years because we had to, and I think that's incredibly important now as part of this discussion. There is an opportunity for us with diversification, and we're also watching closely to further opportunities for value add behind the farm gate because we've always been really focused on what happens, well, beyond the farm gate, because we've really focused on behind the farm gate over the past 20 years. And also the financial incentives. And also the other one we're watching is ecosystem services, and I have to give a bit of a shout out. I'm part of a greenhouse gas collective, and although I take an interest in this data, like it's been largely supported by a group of people in the Taieri catchment that have come together as part of a project with the NZACC funded Ag First collective project. Eric will talk more about that. And so having that group, we're really chewing on some of these big challenges. The market will drive us to further land use diversification, but not full-scale change. It's primarily due to profit of the sheep industry, not the profitability of other land uses. But focusing on government goals for us would be a short-term own goal with potential long-term impacts. The old quote, "You can't be green while you're in the red," is kind of moot. Going further into the red can be required, but choose wisely. That's a challenge for me. Options on farm for us, or actions on farm for us, are considered for how they'll benefit the business, not a tunnel focus on one particular challenge or opportunity. Chasing high production or high levering creates a real risk to our resilience, and it's somewhere that we don't want to be. And at the end of the day, my farm is a business. I can't clutch onto the identity as a sheep farmer. There is a level of responsibility for me as a business owner to consider how we might incorporate methane mitigations, technologies, or not need them. I'm not banking on anyone coming to save me. For me, this is my final one, and I haven't put it up there. This is the easy room. The conversations in here, I mean, to be honest, it's standing up in front of a crowd like this will always be challenging, right? But when it gets really hard is when you're walking into a room in central Otago in a small community, and I guess I've been involved in the freshwater space for a long time, and I challenge you that if you think that this is hard, come and do freshwater in central Otago. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And finally, Ken Goldsmith.
Tēnā koutou whānau mā, ngā mihi nui rangatira e tēnei rā, ko Hikurangi te Mauna, ko Waiapu te Awa, ko Ngāti Porou te Iwi, ko Ken Goldsmith toko ingoa. I'd like to start with a whakatauki, which I think encapsulates what we're trying to do with our greenhouse gas collective in Ruatoki. Ka ora te whenua, ka ora te tangata. When the land is healthy, the people are healthy. I've been fortunate enough to be part of a group of 4 Māori-owned dairy farms in the Ruatoki Valley in our whārua that have come together to form a collective to look at how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from a te ao Māori perspective. We're really at the very start of this journey. We've only had one hui so far, but from that we found that from our perspective, we had to be driven by our value systems. So our uara that we've taken on board to drive this is kaitiakitanga, guardianship of the land, manaakitanga, care and hospitality towards people, whakawhanaungatanga, the building of strong relationships, and kotahitanga, unity and collaboration. These uara guide all of our decision making across all of our business units. They are rooted in who we are, and it is how we care for the environment, how we work together for the greater good of our whānau, hapu and iwi. Looking at a challenge for greenhouse gas reduction, there is a unique challenge for Māori. We aren't able to borrow from banks very easily. Our collective ownership models means that we have to farm really smart, because everything we do has to be financed out of cash flow. We don't have the luxury of end-of-life capital gain on our whenua. Our whenua is for our uri, they're for the ones that will come after us. So we can't farm in that manner. We've got to be more effective and more efficient day by day. But it's those challenges that mean that we have to find a way forward. The environmental impact of the dairy sector can't be ignored, and we must all play our part in creating sustainable solutions. That's not just for us as Māori meeting targets, it's about doing so in a way that aligns with our values, ensures benefit for our people, and demonstrates how a community-driven approach can lead the way to meaningful change. In the face of these challenges, we're not standing alone. One of our most powerful aspects is our rohi-level rōpū, working in a collaborative approach that we as a group of Māori-owned dairy farms can address emission challenges and the broader goal of sustainability. In the Ruatoki Whārua, we're fortunate that we have these 4 Māori-owned dairy farms, and they are Te Tawa Kaiti Lands Trust, Te Manaroa Tūhoi Trust, O Whakatoro Lands Trust, and the Ahu Whenua award-winning organic dairy farm, Tātai Whetū Lands Trust. This collective approach is rooted in our whakawhanaungatanga, the principle of building and maintaining strong and meaningful relationships. It's about working together, not just as separate farms, but as part of our hapuri, to maximise our collective impact. And that means how we give back to our owners, which we can't always do financially, so we have to find innovative ways to do that for them. Part of that is we've been doing koha kai. We grow beef animals on farm, we process them and we koha them to the marae, to the kura, to the whānau. In this time of high inflation and cost of living crisis, that's become more and more of a big benefit for our hapori. We're also looking at ways in which we can farm smarter. So it's been great to hear about the genetic potential of our herds. One of our first plays is that we're actually going to bring Lorna in to a meeting on the 16th, and we're going to be looking at having a full genetic survey of all of the 4 herds in our whāroa, and we're going to look at ways of, well, how can we take out our bottom producing animals and bring in all those top producing animals. Simple, we'll hopefully be able to reduce the number of animals but maintain our productivity. So those are the sorts of things that we're looking at. We've also been using new technologies. On Te Tawakaiti, we're using Halter. We've found that that's been a great resource, but we aren't mining it hard enough yet. So we're going to be looking at how we can get into the data and really start making some gains on, what's our ruminants doing, what is our, genetic potential that we can capture from that. Moving on. At the heart of our work is understanding the benefits must extend beyond the farms. Everything we do is guided by manaakitanga. That, for us, is in the impact of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is not just an environmental issue, it's a community issue. And it's about creating outcomes that improve the lives of our whānau we farm for, while ensuring we upheld our responsibilities to the land. In our hui that we have had, we've had some anecdotes from some of our Pākeke. One of those was that when their tamariki mokopuna come to their house, they won't eat the fruit off their fruit trees because it hasn't come from the New World. They won't eat the eggs unless they're put into a carton. This is in Ruatoki where you're just surrounded by farmland, and yet we've got that sort of disconnect between farm gate and consumer there. What's it like in the cities? So part of this is how do we reconnect our whānau back to their whenua so they can feel that pride that they are part of where their kai is coming from. Part of some of the initiatives we've done to try and bring some of that together, but also to improve our arawai, our waterways, is that we've partnered with Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Environment BOP, my own firm. I got all my girls out planting trees. We planted 2,000 native trees on a section of waterway in 2 hours. That was, great to have. We had the kura, we had rugby teams, we had people that hadn't been on their whenua in their lives come in and be able to actually feel that whenua, put a tree in it and own it. So those are the sorts of things we need to bring our whānau together to be positive in the impact that they can make in this space as well. While our work in Ruatoki is deeply rooted in the values and needs of our community, it also has far-reaching implications for Aotearoa as a whole. New Zealand has a commitment to ambitious climate goals. The agriculture sector, and in particular dairy farming, plays a critical role in meeting these targets. By focusing on collaborative, value-driven approaches, we believe that the work being done in Ruatoki can serve as a blueprint for how farming communities across the Motu can contribute to achieving these goals. Central to our vision is meeting New Zealand's emissions targets with a focus on indirect emissions, the Scope 3s, generated across the supply chain. These emissions are the most challenging to address as they require action not only at the point of production, but across the transportation, processing and consumption. For us, tackling these emissions begins on farm with practices that improve efficiency, reduce waste and lower the overall environmental impact of our operations. With us, we're not doing this alone. We've got Erica and the New Zealand Greenhouse Gas Research Centre. They're supporting us, which is fantastic, in their Future Farm Systems program. It's a vital component of our efforts. Through this collaboration, we're hoping to gather data crucial for understanding our impact and demonstrating the effectiveness of our strategies to policymakers, industry leaders, and other farming communities. And Hini Ho, the General Manager, and I were at the Fonterra Know Your Co-op last 2 days in Auckland. We were fortunate enough to be able to talk to Charlotte Rutherford and Anne Douglas from the Sustainability Panel and Farm Source, and they've both agreed that Fonterra will pitch into our collective and will provide support to us, which is a fantastic benefit for us to have their resources available to us in some way. So, what are we doing? I guess I'll finish with another whakatauki. Kia whakamuri, te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes wide open. We've been given this taonga, this whenua, by our tipuna. It's our responsibility to pass it on to our uri in a better space than the way we found it. This future is full of challenges, but it's also full of hope. By starting small, thinking big, and staying true to our values, we believe we can create a brighter, more sustainable future, not just for the Ruatoki whāroa, but for all of Aotearoa. Together, we can show the world that when people come together with a shared purpose, grounded in respect for the whenua and each other, real change is not only possible, but inevitable. I invite you all to join in this kaupapa. Whether you're farmers, policymakers, researchers, or supporters, there is a place for everyone in this journey towards sustainability and a healthier, more connected future for Aotearoa. Together we can not only meet our climate goals, but we can also create a legacy of care, respect, and opportunity for generations to come. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, Ken. A fitting way to end the presentations. Sinead and I were having a competition last night to see who had the hardest chairing job, 7 scientists or farmers. And I think you guys have nailed it, so thank you. We've had so many questions that I've broken one iPad, and I'm not quite sure where we're at, but there's heaps here. So I'll kick it off with this one, because it was one of the pre-prepared ones, but it's worded way better with whoever's asked this. Huge thanks to the farmers for sharing their stories. What do you think is needed to help more farmers grow their understanding of the opportunities and start taking action?
Here we go. Behind me. Look, one of the things that I think needs to happen to get more farmers to grab the opportunities is we've got to stop this dialogue that the only way we can address greenhouse gases is by compromising profit. That has been the dialogue for the last 5-6 years, that this is a problem that we can't actually address without compromising profit. And so we have, as a sector, almost through the He Waka Eke Noa, through all the politics, instilled into people's brains that this is a win-lose scenario. And what I and others have tried to do is actually show, and what Fonterra is actually showing with their scatter graphs and and it came out with Aidan Gent yesterday, that those farmers that actually chase for efficiency around greenhouse gases actually do drive their profit up. And once we started to apply a focus to it and started looking at the inefficiencies within our system, and we still do have inefficiencies in our system, and we get those inefficiencies out, it is a win-win. It's a win for the environment, it is a win for the economy, and that. So it is so unfortunate, and I'll be critical of our leaders, that not one of them actually stood up and said, this is what I am doing on my farm to try to make a difference for the planet. And you look back over the last 5 years, the leaders that are in the ag sector or in politics, not one has stood up and said what they're prepared to do.
That's a hard one to follow. I completely agree. I think, there has been an industry narrative that is challenging, that is kind of based around how organisations maintain relevance and how that flows through into the narrative of what our farmers hear. And I think someone nailed it yesterday when they said, it's all those little things that you can see. Like if you go to a farmer and tell them to reduce emissions, they can't see emissions, but you go to a farmer and say, okay, what are you doing? Are you direct drilling? Are you doing planting? Are you doing all these other things? It's like, oh, well, suddenly you've actually reduced your emissions already. And I think it's the data of understanding the impacts of little actions is actually really powerful, and it makes it seem like not such a threat. And I think those are the conversations that you need to have instead of just reduce your emissions.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that's the beauty of being in a group. We're all having these conversations all at the same time amongst ourselves. We don't feel threatened by each other because we're all farming for the same thing, and it is profit. We have a lot of owners. When you've got an ownership base of 3,000, you've got to please a lot of people, and that's really difficult, but we've got to do it. That's what we have to do. So, we are farming for profit, that's for sure. There's not going to be any time that we don't.
The good news is the dialogue is changing. I stood up probably close on 3 years ago at an ANZ forum and just talked about what we're doing, and I opened with the thing that I wasn't telling anybody what to do, and the amount of abuse directly to my face, it was hideous. It was not even debating the issues of whether greenhouse gases are real or whatever. It was just that. Now we don't have that, and I give credit to Fonterra in particular with the data they've pushed up and the dialogue actually driving the shareholder base, that the dial is shifting, and it's shifting the right way. And there's two reasons. They've changed the language from not addressing greenhouse gases, but running efficient, profitable businesses. And two, we've had a couple of the Fonterra directors stand up, and I was in the meeting there, and it turned the meeting when he said, "This is what I am doing on my farm, and it is the right thing to do." It just changed the dialogue.
Yeah, and I have seen that at Know Your Co-op last 2 days. The two major topics that people were interested in, and it was a very young room, it wasn't full of older farmers, it was sustainability and emissions reduction. They were the two biggest topics they had. After that was profitability. But it was fantastic to see these farmers that are really concerned with being sustainable and knowing that our trade agreements are going to become a real problem. We've got to be sustainable, or we're not going to be able to trade.
They're cheering themselves now. To the farmers, Cynthia, I've got one for you in a minute. Are you seeing signs of climate change on your farms, and how are you thinking of adapting and incorporating mitigation solutions within a changing climate?
Do you want to go for where you go?
100%. And we've always seen droughts, right? And we've always seen floods, but I think it's the extremities of that and how we, the mitigation, I talked a lot about how we handle emissions, but part of it is also how we handle adaptation. And part of that adaptation for us, and really important in our catchment, is actually tussock grasslands. And at the moment, there's no real incentive to maintain tussock grasslands, but it comes down to that multiple benefit thing again. Tussock grasslands are actually really good shelter for young livestock, so it's in our best interest to maintain them. And that the water holding capacity in that is going to be really important going forward, and also an important one for us is the maintaining and enhancing the scroll plain. But one of the real challenging one, and I've probably segued off a little bit, is weed and pest control over a large area. And you see it starkly with orphaned hill country, which is a result of the dairy boom and intensification of lower areas, and hill country area shut off is the pest and weed issue, which is only going to accelerate with climate change, and that cost coming in as well.
Just building on what Emma says, is we've been on the farm over 30 years now, and the seasons are significantly different and significantly more volatile, and we've got significantly more pasture pests. So what we actually have done, we sat down, Sharon and I, and looked at our farming system, both in terms of are we actually doing the right thing in terms of greenhouse gases and driving the right trend down, and what is that looking like for adaptation? And what we've actually found is the adaptation model and the mitigation model are almost identical, and then we've built on that some resilience around generators, solar and all those things, because the storms that are coming in, and we call it just the tail end of Gabrielle, it took out the power, it took out all sorts of other things it made. And identifying the big risk for us is because we don't have natural waterways, is if we in the summer have, say, 48 hours without power, livestock issue becomes a real issue. How do you get water to 360 head of cattle? And so we never thought about those things now, but these storms are getting harder. It's getting tougher. And the pests, a lot of Waikato, all the chicory had to be resown this year for a pest that we didn't have to deal with before with chicory.
Right, one for Cynthia. We've heard a 4% productivity lift is needed to cover the costs of adoption on farm. Do the numbers stack up for cool sheep, or are methane reduction credits needed on top? Just to throw you a hard one.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I'm gonna put this to the team because that's a really good question. I guess the key point that I want to make here, though, is that in terms of for your farm system, you're thinking about what traits are important for your farm system, and then you're looking at it with a methane lens. So it's really seeing what makes you sustainable as a farm business and then applying on your lens.
Thank you, good answer. This one's for George, but I know Emma has views on it as well, so we'll hear those too. Great to hear you as a farmer call out absolute reductions as opposed to intensity reductions. What are your insights as to the danger of confusing the two in a farmer's mind?
I don't think we can confuse the two in the farmer's mind. We've actually got to, the messaging has got to be that we've got to achieve both. There's got to be absolute reductions for all the reasons that we know why, but we've also got to be competitive in the marketplace, which is about intensity. And initially, I started off in the position that the two were absolutely opposite each other, that the two couldn't actually be achieved. You had to go for one or the other. And we actually agonised over, how we were going to get this absolute down and not drive our intensity up. But then when we started to really delve into it, and that's why I mentioned that we've been in those models for a long time, you can actually achieve both. And I'm absolutely quite certain that if you achieve the efficiency, you'll pull the absolute down. And that's why when we start to benchmark ourselves against the, if you like, some of the more intensive farms and the risk profile of those intensive dairy farms and the volatility that goes around that, then I'm pretty confident. But again, it's all about the messaging. And so we've just got to change the messaging at that one, we've got to achieve both, but they're not, one or the other. I'm trying to think of the word, but I can't. Where you go, Emma?
Yeah, I think
mutually exclusive.
For the sheep and beef industry, I think it doesn't allow room for the massive productivity gains that we've actually already had, and I think that's the key flaw. And I think it's difficult to decipher, or for people to get, it's mixed messaging in people's minds, right? Because the New Zealand targets are absolute, and I think we can't. I think we've really got to be really careful with messaging around that.
Thank you. One for you, Ken. What critical actions will achieve a low emission, thriving primary sector?
For me, it starts with the genetics. That's the baseline. We should be renovating our herds so that we're only farming with the best animals. We know that for very many reasons, we have a large section of our herds that are not good BW, PW animals. Collectively, that's something that we can do together. It's very difficult for us to individually go out and renovate a herd. We don't have the money to do that. So what we're looking to do is collectively, we'll take the best animals from everybody's herds and we'll renovate them together. We're also going to, and from a wider industry perspective, I think we also need to be looking at, land use. For us, we farm from dead flat, river flats, up into steep and rolling, and we know that our effective dairy base is maybe 207 hectares, of that the actual effective is 170. We need to be looking at a better use for that land, and whether that's planting natives. I'm not a great fan of pine. We've got 5,000 hectares of that on one of our trusts already. We need to be looking at land use. What's the best land use? And should we be farming dairy here, or should we be doing something else? We need to go through that process, and I think a lot of New Zealand does. We've got to be honest with ourselves. Are we doing the right thing on this whenua, for that whenua?
Thanks, Ken. George or Emma, have you got views on that one? Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, just that I think Ken's absolutely right, and with the sex semen now and the indices that come out of both CRV and LIC, it is just a tremendous opportunity. And yes, we haven't put capital in it, but we have just leapfrogged ahead. And now I'm sort of looking at, we've got the herd where we want it to be at that top end, and so when the low methane animals come in, if there is some negative correlation, hopefully the impact will be very minimal for us.
Yeah, we've actually started on we do have low methane in our AI program already, where our girls will be coming into lactation this season. So we're actually really interested to see how that goes and if they're any different to our conventional herd.
I can't remember what the question was, so just go to the next one.
What critical actions will achieve a low emission, thriving primary sector?
Go to the next one.
Just a hint, team, that this is part of the workshop questions that the whole room are going to have to answer later on, and you're all going to stay because we need collective solutions. This is to the farmers again. What are your key messages to those in the room and the sector itself about what farmers need for a mindset shift for hope, not hysteria?
I think it's the bite-sized, it's the little bite, it's the little things. It looks like a mountain, but it's just little chunks. And I think we see a lot of hysteria, and I said this before, around how messaging gets through, and that can make these discussions in rural communities actually really polarising, and that alone can be really challenging in that space. But yeah, it's just making it look achievable, like the little visible things.
I can only think of two cliches, and there's nothing to be scared of but fear itself. Nothing to fear but fear itself, and walk towards those problems that won't go away, and put a plan around them. And as you listen to the rhetoric of the last 5 years, it's all been fear-based. It's absolutely been fear-based. Nobody's actually sat down and sort of said, at the grassroots level, let's put a plan around this thing, let's walk towards it, let's think about what the solutions could be. There will be mistakes made, but if we're on the right journey, we will have time to correct those. And time is our greatest ally. And my criticism is we frittered, and myself included, frittered basically 10 years away. We started to know the answer in 2009 when it came out of Dairy NZ that we can actually drop greenhouse gases 15%, drive up profit 23% with the technology we had then. But nobody wanted to hear it, and I'm guilty as charged.
Same, exactly. I think my mindset's shifted a lot, but I think a lot of it's personal mindset as well, looking at the glass half full instead of the glass half empty.
Absolutely. Headspace.
Okay, one final question for you all. What does New Zealand's primary sector look like in 2050? I've gone off script because I've broken another iPad, so sorry to...
Do you want to go? Where you go? You go. We'll go from this end there.
So I'm going to put the disclaimer first that I'm speaking from my own personal views. Thriving, sustainable, profitable, happy and healthy.
What it looks like in 2050 is based on the decisions we make now. If we walk towards the challenges and accept them as a challenge and an opportunity, and we'll be thriving, strong, and all those things. If we are driven by fear, we will go down. We will keep unwinding our own sectors.
Yeah, I think to follow on from that, we can shift our focus away from the government and what they're saying and focus on that long-term view. I think that's a really good place to start. It's going to look different, right? But it's, as you say, it's up to us.
I totally everything that the other panellists have said, and I do believe it will be thriving, and we will still be an agricultural-based economy, but we will be the best in the world.
Nice. There's a reason for hope if ever there was one. So thank you very much, panellists. Just a couple of key points. It's more than a couple because it's me. that I took from everyone. So the systems context is key. Everyone talked about what they're doing in the context of their whole system and not just greenhouse gases in isolation. Solutions need to be desirable, credible, profitable, there's lots of balls here, productive, and connected to values as well. Everyone needs collective action, and these guys are all doing something now, but they need backing to enable that. It's very, very tough to be doing this on your own. And they're all taking ownership of the challenge, so we should absolutely get in behind them. And I was reminded of a quote from the late John Aspinall, who owned Mount Aspiring Station down in Wanaka, who was an environmentalist well before his time, who said sustainable management will not be achieved by rules, regulations, legislation or plans. It is achieved by those working the land with sweaty brows and dirty hands. It's a good thing to remember. So if you could join me in thanking the panel for their wonderful insights, experience and leadership.